Well, good evening, everyone. I am Juanita Shepherd, and I thank you for joining us on tonight for Faith and Philanthropy. This is our November session, and we'll be spending some time on tonight discussing and reviewing some things around building better. So, again, we thank you for being with us tonight, and we are happy to have you join with us in this conversation. Again, we talking about building better. As you know, we started this conversation since February, so many of you have stuck it out with us. And so we are happy to have you here with us and look forward to the conversation on tonight. The one thing I will say, even as we get started, I just want to take a moment. Um, Today, we found out that one of our beloved professors, Dr. Love Henry Welcher Jr., the beloved professor of ITC's African American Church History, has transitioned with the ancestors, and we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge his presence and all that he's brought into the lives of the students at ITC and those who are part of the CME faith. We all love Dr. Welcher. Dr. Welcher was the person who helped me to understand church history in a way I would not have otherwise understand. Just his passion for the work that he'd done and the things that he's brought to the table is one of the reasons why this even exists. And really having conversations around faith and philanthropy and what that looks like is always around the time that we are together. I just got a note, someone said, you said November is October. You know, it all flows right about now. Again, so Dr. Welcher, we love him. We love his family and definitely will be praying for him, the church where he formerly pastored, and all those who are involved. Again, just acknowledging this great man of God and all that he's contributed to our lives and the lives of those who have a love for the Black church. So on tonight, I just want to take some time to really begin to delve into building better. And I thought this was a great opportunity for us to really have some conversations around what that looks like in terms of looking at this last quarter. Can you believe it's already October? I thought it was January and February, and next thing I know, it was the summertime, and already I'm starting to feel, the fall breezes. The weather here in Atlanta this morning was about 45 in some areas, 50s in others. And so we're definitely feeling that transition for the fall. If it's here to stay or just for a moment, we know that it is definitely here. So again, I can't believe it's already this time. And so we're in the third quarter of the year. So we have October, November, December to go. And before we know it, with the Lord's blessing, we'll live to see 2022. And so I just want to take some time really just to talk about what kind of things have we learned in this time. So what kind of things have we learned up until this point for this year? And so there are a couple of things I just wanted to share with you. So one of the things that we've learned was absence from physical space does not equate to lack of interest in faith building engagement. And so there's a study done by the Lake Institute on Faith and Philanthropy, and it's a COVID-19 congregational study. And I quote them as saying, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in March, a slightly majority of congregations reported an actual increase in participation. And so again, a lot of churches and places of faith were taken aback with the whole shift and what do I do if my church closes, and how do we maintain this? But we found that people are actually more engaged in the virtual church. One, because people have options, and two, they can go from one church to another fairly easy just through switching platforms. So again, the level of engagements that we've seen during this COVID-19 time has been people are more engaged. So that's a great thing. And the second thing, I've talked to a couple of my pastor friends, is that while people were worried about losing members, they actually gained members through virtual interaction. So that's some great news that's coming out of our time and what's happening with our experiences, that people are not losing members, but they are gaining active members through this time. And so that is great news for the church. That's great news for the body of Christ. That's great news for all of us. And the second thing I think that we've learned in this time is virtual space. It was necessary. So the space that we have is necessary, but people still and had a need for connection. So the churches that are growing, the churches that are blossoming, the churches that are really finding ways to maneuver around this not so normal time, and it won't be normal for a while, are finding creative ways to engage their congregations. And as a result of that, and finding ways to find connective spaces for people. And so I've seen several ministries who have done some creative things. I've seen the parking lot Sunday services, and that has been cool to watch that, and giving opportunity for people to physically come on the physical space of where their congregations or churches located, and other ones who have had an opportunity to really think about what does connection mean? And so finding virtual spaces. And so people have been very creative. I've actually attended a virtual ministers in training licensing ceremony. So I thought that was cool. So again, finding ways to find space and help people to stay connected. I've seen virtual Bible studies in Sunday schools, and all those things have been great in terms of building and making sure that people stay connected and not feeling like they have to be physically in the building. For some of us who are lucky enough, we had an opportunity to go within our congregations and to be with our congregation members social distance wise. Those have been great experiences as well. I remember my first experience going back to our in-live service at our church at Changing was really a moment for me. And it's the things I hadn't been in almost it's a year. And we went back, and the first thing I noticed was I actually missed the sound of the raspiness, and to be able to hear the audio during praise and worship. And it's something I never paid attention to before, that now was like, oh, wow, didn't realize how much the small things in ministry that we miss. And so again, people want to be connected. They want to have places to go. But the other thing that we've learned, where I'm going to kind of seek myself tonight, is though many churches have pivoted and understanding how to connect virtually in physical space, many have not learned how to shift in the giving space. So what do I mean by that? Really, it's looking at how do we begin to shift from a space of thinking about giving and what that looks like when people are in person, and what does that look like when people aren't able to come to a physical space. And so I've watched the verbiage of pastors and said some of them are still not understanding how to connect. And so again, this time is a space for you to not only look at what is happening inside your church, but as a pastor, as an elder in charge, or if you are leading service in any way, you have to always think about not only who you're connecting with in person, but also all of the physical and virtual people who are also connected, who want to figure out ways to do that. I've seen some really great opportunities where some churches have put together internet pastors or virtual pastors. And so the pastor will be doing some things in terms of the church in person, but then other ones will have like this sidebar where the virtual pastor will be online and interacting with the people who are online. So I think those are some cool things, some great opportunities for us to really do some things. But it also goes back to not virtual, just interacting with the congregation in terms of the physical space and making sure that they feel connected to the message. But also, when you think about the giving space and how we need to shift, pre-COVID, a lot of churches were really built on events. And so we had church conferences, we had a lot of networking opportunities, we had Women's Day and Men's Day and Kids Day and every other day you can think of, church anniversary, pastor's birthday, we had all these events, and everything was always centered around an event. But then COVID happened and it stopped a lot of the events. And so what I think that is a place of opportunity for us now is that we should have an opportunity to shift from events-driven work to one of going back to mission-driven. And so going from a place of not cheerleading events all the time or the things that are happening within our church, but really solidifying our messaging for what is the mission of our church. What do we want people to know about our church? What do you want about people to know about the work that we do within our church? And as again, people who know me know I'm community oriented. What is our church is doing within community? The other thing I've seen a lot of within churches, both good and bad, is that some ministries have taken the time to really understand their community in ways and understand community need, and have gotten away from the place where they are worrying about the church building per se. And I remember listening to something, and T.D. Jakes had, he preached the sermon for Pastor John Hanna for the opening of his church in Chicago. And he said it, and I say it all the time, is that it doesn't mean enough for you just to be able to build a building if you're not going to build the church, the people. And so how do we go about doing that and relaying that and messaging that? And so there I'm going to shout out a couple of ministries, because I do that because I pay attention. So I absolutely going to shout out New Birth, which is literally 5 minutes from my house. And so New Birth, what I love what they're doing over there, and Pastor Jamal Bryant, is that he has taken this to another place of community service and understanding both the needs of his congregation and the needs of the community. And so I think it's called the Father's Table, if I can get that right. The New Birth folk could fix that out. But really have an opportunity to give to community and finding ways to partner with other organizations. Because again, the one thing that New Birth has figured out that many of us are slowly beginning to find out is collaboration matters. It's not about competition. It really is about collaboration. When we get into times when resources are stretched and there is not a lot available, then we find ways, how do we take and shift from the place of lack to a place of more than enough? Is that sometimes we have to get together. And so where maybe one church was doing something, or maybe in Atlanta, Lord Jesus, there are 12,000 churches on one strip. Maybe, 2 or 3 churches get together and hold one large, impactful, eventful event. The other church I like to shout out is in New Orleans. Pastor Brandon Boutin, who I absolutely love what he's done over there in terms of, again, this substance and this place of collaboration, where he's not just working with churches, and I've seen that, and I think it's awesome, and them taking 18-wheelers and trucks and going out to different neighborhoods. But another thing I've noticed with Pastor Boutin and what he's doing in New Orleans, United Fellowship, Gospel Baptist Church, is that he has begun to partner and has continued to partner with city officials. He just recently had an event in recognizing the work of police officers and some first responders. And so it's things like that, and finding ways for us really to connect in ways that drive our mission. And so when we can't have events, when we can't have the balls and the galas and all those things, it's like, how do we again begin to re-enter into the place of having mission-driven fundraising activities? And so we're going to spend some time on this on tonight, and I actually won't be too long before you. And so the one thing I want to point out is, and I've said it in every session, and I will continue to say this, is that relationships matter. If nothing else I've learned in this time is that the people we're connected to, the relationships that we have, how we view and value people matters in this time, in this season. I had a conversation today with someone, just kind of called her because I thought about her, had her on my mind. And her statement was, "You're probably one of the few church members who still calls me." And it's just a touch. And so in fundraising, we talk about this. Relationships matter by touch. So by touch, it means, how do you communicate with your congregation? And so it could mean by email, by phone, by messaging. It could mean, pre-recorded messages. I've seen people going back to that. But it also could mean just these one-on-one personal conversations. Just having someone on your mind and having an opportunity, again, to connect with people in the way that they need to be connected to. The second thing I think I wanted to show, I hope I can show this picture. There is a place in Georgia called Providence Canyon State Park. For those who have been to Providence Canyon, you know that it is about 2 hours or so away from Atlanta. And I want to be able to share this. I'm trying to do this correctly. Give me 2 seconds. I'm almost there. Give me a second. We're almost there. Okay, I think I got it. This is all a work in progress for me. Okay, while I'm still trying to figure this out, I want to, I think it's showing up now. And so I hope you can see that. Um, and so this screen is a weird shared, but oh, there it is. It's popped up now. So the picture that you see now is of Providence Canyon State Park, and it is a park located in South Georgia. And the reason I wanted to bring this picture up and show it was that if you ever have an opportunity to go down there, they call it the Little Grand Canyon of Georgia. But you ever have an opportunity to go down there, you'll find this magnificent place in the middle of nowhere. There's no major cities near this at all. It is definitely country roads and back roads that you go to access it. But what I love about Providence Canyon is the same thing that brings me great trepidation in terms of its story. So when you go here, you see the many layers and the canyons and the falls, and it's absolutely beautiful on a sunny day. The colors just pop. You see the layers and the grains of the canyon. But when you have an opportunity to talk to any of the people who are park officials, they tell you the story behind the canyon. And this canyon was actually um, created, developed as a result of over processing of farmland. So at some point, people didn't understand when they continued to pull, seed, harvest, and never allow for a breaking in space, that this was a result. But it also was a reminder to me that God can take something that was neglected and make it beautiful. So again, if you have opportunity, you can have an opportunity. You can go down to South Georgia and to see that particular space. So again, how does this relate to fundraising? It really goes back to this whole cycle of giving. So how do you begin to do that, and what does that look like? In this space, you'll learn that we have been in this rat race with giving, and it was all based upon how much money I can get. Can I keep the lights on? Can I get the bills paid? And all those things are certainly important in how we do things. But sometimes we get to what's called donor fatigue. And what donor fatigue is, it's when we pour out and pull and ask for so much that the return begins to erode. I'm going to use that same analogy using the canyon, Providence Canyon, that we begin to erode the trust. We begin to erode um, the resources of the people who we're being called to serve. And so in that space, I want to kind of build upon something that we do within the professional space and donors, and it's called the donor cycle. So a donor cycle is a system that was developed in which it helps us to understand as fundraisers how to systematically grow and to know that we're making the right type of ask with individuals. And so we're going to spend a couple of minutes just going through the first two steps. I didn't want to do the whole entire thing because one, time does not permit it. But I also didn't want to be negligent in how I present this information to you. And so the first thing I want to talk about is identification. That's the first step when you're looking at building fundraising efforts. So identification is really around how do you begin to identify who your donors are, who are prospective donors, who should you be looking at, those type of things. And then figuring out, is that person a potential donor for you? And so that's a broad scope of how we look at things. And so within our congregation, and again, I would say with Places of Faith, pre-COVID, we had carte blanche to our donors every Sunday. And so we actually had a place where we can talk to our donors every Sunday if we wanted to, understanding that as we were figuring out our communications. But then COVID happened, and a lot of our donors decided not to physically come back into the space. And so because of the virtual space, we actually lost some of that personal touch. But what it does is, and looking at this space, is really understanding that we have to figure out who our donors are. And so it's like, even in marketing, who's your audience? Where do you find them? And so within a church body, most of us are looking within our local congregations. But then the second part to this is qualification. And this is kind of what I'm going to land for tonight. Is qualifications is, okay, you've identified who your donors are. Qualification is the most important step in this process. I think so. So, and qualification is really about you learning about your donor, but also giving opportunity for your donor to learn about you. And so again, how do you do that? And we've kind of talked about this in some previous videos. And one way we talked about this was really about the new member intake form. And so when you have new members who are joining your ministry, even as you are going through new member orientation classes and those type of things, the new member intake form is a great way for you to understand your congregation's interests. And so if you're not doing that, again, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. And when we talk about philanthropy, again, it's time, talent, treasure. And then one of our former panelists added testimony. And so your new member intake form is a great way for you to be able to do that. But then once you have the new members, then the second part is we have to do periodic updates of our members' information. If you have bounce emails or you're getting return physical mail, then we are wasting money. And so another way is to periodically, normally congregations do it every 2 to 3 years. They'll ask their members to ensure that their information is correct, your emails are correct, your telephone numbers are correct. Because one, it helps us to be able to keep in contact with you. And it also gives us a way to ensure that we have adequate information on how we communicate with you. But then again, this also is an opportunity for our congregations to understand a little bit more about us. So qualification is almost like a courtship. And so we are learning each other. And so during that time, again, if the first time that your congregation or donor hears from you is you asking for money, it is not a good sell at all. Your first ask of a donor of your congregation should be not of treasure, even though that is a part of that and support, but it should be time, or it could be, I shouldn't say should, or it could be talent. So if we really are looking at ways for us to become more mission driven, then the time and talent is a way for you to begin to connect with the congregation. So instead of me in my first ask and new members being leave an offering, my first response should be, how do we begin to make sure that this person feels connected and invested in the mission of our church. And you all know the scripture, where the heart is, that's where the treasure is. And so a lot of this has not to do with so much about how much people give, but how much people feel connected to the mission of your church. If people feel connected to the mission of your church and the work that you're doing, the money will come. It won't be a hard sell. You can tell the congregation what you need and it'll happen. So where the disconnect comes a lot of times is that we have gotten to what I call mission drift. And mission drift comes when we are chasing after money instead of the mission. And then it takes us away from being able to focus on those things that we say that are most important to our organization. So again, identification is the first step when we're looking at donors. So who are your donors? Understanding your market. And the second, again, is qualifications. Saying, how do we do this? How do we learn about not only our congregation, but how does our congregation learn about us? And again, make it personal. Some of this, and what I love about COVID and this time is that a lot of pastors have opened up a little bit more and let us see their personhood. And that made me, I've seen pastors' dogs and them playing with them. And I thought that was cool because in a normal, formal, structured church setting, I would have never been invited into a pastor's playtime and things like that. And so again, that's, as a congregant, it makes that person more personable to me. And it's not just a person who's a pastor and he's up at the book board or the pulpit and he's preaching, but I get to see the person as a person. And that's another way where people feel like, help me to connect with you. Another way you can do that is through paying attention to social media posts. So as you are intentionally thinking about what to post, you can post and be very intentional about specific topics. And so if you want to talk about youth and what you're doing in terms of youth and literacy, then you can have a post about that. If you want to think about garnering more support around the homeless population, those who are in transition, then think about how can you use social media to be able to do that. And with that, you can pay attention to the likes. So in your congregation, if your congregation is connected to your social media streams, then who are liking those pages? Who are sharing and reposting your social media posts? And so again, that's another way to begin to identify and see who is actively involved in this area. And then another way is polls. And so there are many different virtual platforms available where you can actually do polls and just ask a question. I've seen this on Instagram where people asked a question and said, can someone, how many people have ever, let's say, how many people have never learned how to swim in their lifetime? And then you can respond to that question. But as a result of that, then again, that gives me an opportunity to understand the person better and how they responded. So these are some ways so we can look at how do you begin to qualify and look at that and see what needs to happen. And then lastly, I would say, with COVID and looking at how do we begin to really think about preparing for the next year, a great way for us to do that is to think about scheduling. And again, we've kind of mentioned this in a previous post, but really talking about how do you begin to intentionally set yourself up for success. And so thinking about how you want to develop a fundraising structure. Again, this is not about competition. This is about collaboration. You have to have more people at the table. And so what does that look like? It means that I need to have the pastor at the table or one of his assistants. I need to have the marketing department because again, as we're trying to develop and map things out, I need to understand social media and what can and cannot be done. I need to have some of my outreach people at the table. So as we think about messaging and what connects with people, I need to have someone who is in marketing and who is a great storyteller. Those who can just tell stories and bring things to life are probably one of the underused people in our church. I know within Changing, there's, I'm shout out Ed Perry at Changing, who is a great comedian. And Ed just has a way of telling stories and making you laugh, and laughter opens you up. And so, again, those are opportunities for you to think creatively about how to do this. And so, I'm going to kind of close it out in terms of me talking on tonight. But if you have any questions or something you would like to have some guidance on, if you would put out in the chat, I'll look at that and see what is happening. And then we'll kind of go from there. So if there are any questions regarding the two areas we talked about, so we talked about identification and we talked about qualification. If there are any questions. All right, I'm not seeing any questions right now. So at this moment, I'm going to assume that all hearts and minds are clear. And I look forward to seeing you on next month. And we'll continue this conversation around donor engagement. There are definitely ways to build better, and we want to be able to help you to get there. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Have a good night.